r/AskReddit. What did that bitch do at your wedding? By the time of our wedding, my husband's 33-year-old sister was still single, and she hated that her younger brother was getting married first. How did she deal with it? By trying to sabotage my wedding. The night before our wedding, she got shit-faced and, while ugly crying, told my husband that it was supposed to be her wedding and it wasn't fair because she'd be able to plan a much better wedding than ours. That would eventually prove to be false, as she finally got her off-again boyfriend to propose by giving him an ultimatum. We had a small elegant outdoor wedding at a mountain lodge, and my still convinced some family members on my husband's side that the dress code was casual, so they showed up in jeans, t-shirts, and hoodies. I was beyond upset with them for readily taking my sales word without double checking with us. Luckily my photographer was sensible enough to exclude them from the pictures as much as possible. At our reception she went around complaining to our guests about how cheap our wedding was. My husband's side is used to those typical church and banquet hall weddings and ours was way different. But still, it's rude to shit all over someone else's wedding at their wedding. The lodge had a hot tub on the property, and near the end of the night, when people were starting to leave, she changed into her bathing suit and chilled in the hot tub. This was planned ahead of time, because she thought to bring her bathing suit there. My husband and I don't really talk to her anymore. My sister's wedding. Our relatives on my father's side are not the greatest, just not really respectable people. They are on the poorer side, which isn't a problem, but their attitude is. They think the world owes them something. My parents both grew up in poorer families, but worked really hard and became pretty successful. Because of this, my sister and I constantly got comments from our cousins that were just straight shitty, constantly making us feel bad for being better off. To combat this, kids were not allowed, only aunts and uncles. It bummed us out, because one family on my dad's side is actually awesome, but the rules stood because of the shitty ones. So of course, the worst of all our aunts brings her fucking kids. Her two daughters share her bratty entitlement. It was awful, and now caused a rift with the family we like, because their kids weren't welcome, but they are. Another shitty aunt tried to make the entire event about her. She was pissed that the guests of honor were my parents' best friends and not family. My grandmother introduced the best friends to everyone, and when it got to that aunt, she stuck her nose up, turned around and walked away. The best friends cracked a joke as she walked away, and everyone was laughing at her, which was nice. Well, I have 3 shitty aunts, and they basically tried to destroy the evening. Now my family makes themselves busy during holidays. My sister lives in another state. My parents leave a few days before Thanksgiving to go to their summer home and don't return until after New Year's. That leaves me alone to make excuses why I'm not attending their holiday parties. My sister's wedding. The groom's grandma and female cousins, parents are deceased, wiped their feet on my sister's dress train during pictures, then stole all the bottles of wine that had the labels customized to read the wedding vows of the groom's parents, then proceeded to bring back hard liquor, do shots, and grind on the DJ while he was playing bass booming hip hop that my sister and her husband explicitly said they didn't want. After those shenanigans, they also threatened to physically assault my sister and my mother. Edit. My sister didn't confront them because she didn't want to give them the pleasure of seeing her hurt or angry on her wedding day. The groom is no contact with his cousins and low contact with his grandparents. My sister hasn't seen any of them since the wedding. The grandma wasn't doing any grinding, but the groom found out later that she orchestrated the whole thieving of the wine bottles, which occurred while my mom and sister stepped away after the ceremony because the woman who was going to perform was dying in hospice and we needed to say goodbye. My sister is white, my Bill is black, and I don't think his family is racist. I just don't think they like my sister. We had a very small ceremony and a very intimate wedding dinner with our families. One of my closest friends invited herself. I should have said no, but I felt bad. Plus I had just recently told her she wasn't gonna be the maid of honor at my wedding reception, which was couple months away, so I thought maybe this would make up for it. One extra person wouldn't hurt, would it? Biggest fucking mistake. We had a long day and she started drinking early and could not control her alcohol. I had asked her to keep my parents company since they're here from a different country and they don't speak a lot of English. All she focused on was the many bottles of wine. By the time we sat down for dinner, she was slurring. In the middle of dinner, everybody was enjoying themselves. She told my husband that he's taking me away from her and that she's mad at him because of it. We laughed it off and I asked the server to limit her wine. A little later, she stared at my parents who were having a good time, leaned over to me and asked, "Is your dad still cheating on your mom?" Note, my parents went through a rough patch couple years back and my mom insisted that my dad was not being honest with her. There was no proof and to say my mom is dramatic is an understatement. They got over it and still together now. Nevertheless, that period of time was very difficult for me. When she asked me that question, I just stared at her blankly. Part of me was so embarrassed and worried that someone else may have heard what she said. But more so it just brought back bad memories about my parents' marriage on my own wedding. It literally ruined my mood. I was horrified. I straight out told her that it wasn't appropriate to mention that. She was embarrassed, so she kept drinking more and more. She then started to call her boyfriend to come pick her up. He immediately got annoyed at her because she has been drinking so much and hung up on her. She proceeded to call him 38 times, eventually sitting at the table crying on the phone, while both my families sat there awkwardly not knowing what to do. Eventually, her BF agreed to come get her. I had to gather her stuff and walk her out. She did not say bye or thank you to anyone. The cherry on top was that she realized how stupid she was and called me 10 times that night to try to talk to me on my wedding night. This is a two-parter. My grandmother made my sister late to her reception. Wanted to give her a large check as a gift, but insisted that her and my sorry but spineless grandpa give her that gift in private. Everyone left the house for the venue, and an hour later, my sister arrives. Apparently my grandmother essentially held her hostage with the damn thing, and only gave it over after giving her a huge lecture and saying a bunch of, sadly typical, poisonous things. The start of my sister's reception was no bride, and then an upset bride putting on a strong show for people. I know her well enough to know it when I see it. The next part is worse. My great grandmother didn't show up to the wedding or reception. That stung, as you might imagine. She only lived around an hour away, but my grandmother had mentioned that my Gigi didn't want to make the trip. We found out later that this was because my grandmother told her own mom that my sister didn't care if she made the trip or not, so she stayed home for her uncaring great granddaughter's wedding. Hurt all around. Not even the worst shit my grandmother's done in the last 15 years. I want to love her, but I'm of the belief that the world will be a better place when she's not in it anymore. She's too consistently toxic to anyone naive enough to let her close, and it makes me more sad than angry these days. Not my wedding, it was my ex-brother-in-law's. His mother claimed to be a self-employed caterer, and while she had worked in the industry in the past, she had no actual business to speak of at the time. She just had a normal domestic kitchen with no facilities to prepare or store large amounts of food and a rather cavalier attitude to cleanliness. She already had a very dodgy track record with her previous attempts. After insisting on catering for my ex's 21s, she had given a couple of people food poisoning and delivered a quiche with mold growing on its base. She insisted on catering her son's wedding, but he was refusing. He knew that she couldn't possibly do a proper job of it, and besides, he wanted his mother at his wedding as a guest and not as paid help. So she was told that a professional caterer was going to be employed. On the big day everything was going well, and while the caterer was setting up for the evening party, the mother accosted me and asked me and my ex to run her home in my car. When we got there, she had prepared a whole load of food which she wanted to take to the party. Despite my protestations, she insisted, so we loaded up a huge pot of curry, a gigantic trifle, and about half a dozen other plates of random food. When we got back to the venue, she asked us to unload it all and add it to the paid catering. I managed to grab the groom before we took anything in and he flipped. Apparently he and his bride had already had a big argument with her and insisted that they were not serving curry at their wedding. Whoever made it. He sent my ex inside to keep his mother busy while we hauled the curry across to the other side of the car park and poured it down a storm drain before throwing the pot in a builder skip. We attracted the attention of a group of teenagers that were hanging around on the car park and he handed them the huge trifle and told them to get rid of it for him. All of the smaller dishes ended up going inside, including a rather odd looking cake with bright green icing. She didn't notice that the curry and trifle were missing until it was time to eat. We all pleaded ignorance and suggested that the real caterers had removed them or someone had stolen them. When we left for the evening, several of the cars and the venue windows were smeared with trifle, courtesy of the gang of teens. So we put the blame on them for sneaking in and stealing the food. Everybody who ate the weird looking green cake got food poisoning. Not my wedding, but I was best man at my close friend's wedding. I'm from a small town where everybody knows everybody. My ex was there because she was part of the same friend group as the bride, groom, and myself. We dated in high school / first year off college. When I broke it off, she did not take it well at all. Never spoke to her or saw her again except for my occasional trips home from college. Fast forward 5 years to the wedding reception. I had brought my fiancée, which at the time we had been dating 4 years. My ex got unbelievably drunk. She made out with anything she could get her hands on. She was obviously trying to send me a message. On more than one occasion I would be talking to a friend who she would grab from behind, drag them off 15 feet and stick her tongue down their throat. At this point she was slurring her words and stubbing. My parents were also at the wedding. When I started talking to my dad, she came up from behind as before to drag off the person I was talking to. Not realizing it was my dad, she spun him around and got halfway to his face with kissing lips before she got the deer in the headlights look. I cackled. Later in the night on the dance floor she punched my mother in the stomach. She did this without warning and without my mother even seeing it coming. After that she was removed from the wedding and I heard she ended up puking outside. I wasn't the one getting married here, but a cousin of mine got married to a woman who is part of a very culturally insecure Argentinian family. The bride and groom always seemed really happy together, though, so it all was fine. At the reception, after everyone's been drinking a lot, one of the bride's very drunk sisters makes a speech. She brings out some paper and unfolds it downwards to open it up. Then unfolds sideways and upwards, revealing it to be a large, wrinkled sheet. It was like a gag from a comedy movie, which we all seemed to expect it to be in its intentions. But no. She then rambles for about 15 minutes, even with her eyes poring over prepared notes in front of her, about how she didn't like the groom when she first met him. How she was pretty sure the parents didn't like him either. She switches between crying her eyes out and not crying at all multiple times as she unveils this story about the married couple meeting in a nightclub as teens, how they'd become a couple until the groom realized his now bride had been underage, so he called it off, how they'd met years later when she was legal, how much they fought and broke up with each other often, one as recently as months before the wedding, how she, the sister, now loved that they had a baby on the way and that she's proud of her sister being a mother. I mean, the whole thing was like something from a Vince Vaughn movie. In any other context, everything she said would have sounded like a speech she was giving to damn them both publicly, but she said it all just as a mix of pride as a sister and stream of consciousness. The entire occasion went from run of the mill to awkward as fuck with that one event. Soon-to-be mother-in-law doesn't show up to the wedding cause she hates her soon-to-be son-in-law. Reason still unknown years later, but she damn sure showed up to the reception for the free food and open bar. I forgot this happened to me. Will never received. Texts the groom the day of that she is coming. Showed up right as the ceremony was starting. We thought she wouldn't show at all by that point, and at the restaurant reception she ordered her food with the request that it be brought out quicker than everyone else's, so she could eat it and catch a flight in 2 hours for her vacation. Her ex-husband, best Phil ever, made it clear that he would leave his card and no one else should try to pay for the meal. Mill literally said, "Oh, I'm such a dine and dasher getting this big meal paid for by Phil before my flight." She gobbled up her steak and potatoes and left before we could even place our orders. For reference between good and evil, Phil wasn't even there to hear that comment because he had to take his new wife, awesome, bonus Mill, to the hospital because she broke her ankle helping me get ready that morning. That lady planned, organized, executed the entire wedding while having a hairline fracture, and she did not complain once. It took her from 10 AM until the 7 PM reception to call it quits and go to the hospital. Phil still insisted on going to the restaurant and leaving his card. There is still good in the world. My sister's wedding was a bit over the top but beautiful. Castle, south of France, need I say more? She had this group of friends who all put some money in an envelope as a present. One girl, the new girlfriend of one of the boys, said something like, "I don't have a lot to give and feel embarrassed to put my participation in front of you." So she took the envelope in the loo and added her money there, away from judging eyes. Yep, you guessed it, she took more than 500 euros from the envelope. They only find out when one of those friends asked, weeks later, if the newlyweds had enjoyed the 1000 euros during the honeymoon. The girl's excuse was that she was planning her own wedding and could just afford a city hall affair, and it was so unfair my sister had such a great venue. I'm personally quite immune to princess wedding day, but stealing money at a wedding is so wrong. I think the girl ended up as a bit of a castaway. My sister's marriage didn't last anyway, so I don't know what happened to her group of friends, but I often think of this girl and imagine her as one of life's constantly unhappy and envious. My mother, my so and I ended up doing a courthouse type marriage. Did the papers, found someone to marry us, went to her office to do it. The only people there were my ex-stepdad, I call him bonus dad, mom, aunt, uncle, and grandmother. My mom was my maid of honor. Bonus dad was my so's best man. Right in the middle of our vows, my mom breaks down sobbing, interrupting everything. The bitch is obviously trying to get the attention on her, since she can't seem to stand not being the middle of everything. We try to continue over her sobbing, but only starts crying louder. My aunt, being the amazing person she is, grabbed the ring from my mom, pushed her towards my uncle who pretty much dragged her outside. Aunt quickly announced she's the maid of honor now, which I was completely fine with, and the vows carried on. After signing everything we go out to get to the car and my mom is just furious at me for letting your aunt do that. I just ignored her and went to the car. On the upside, when we were saying our vows, bonus dad started tearing up. It made me happy because it was super unlike him. Kinda guy who never says I love you because that's just him. Ex-first sergeant, served from 1972 to 2007, manly man. I love you bonus dad. Fuck you mom. After the ceremony, we were taking group pics with both families. After a couple of pictures, my mother-in-law starts walking around loudly proclaiming, "Can we get a picture with just the close family, please?" My husband and I were like sure, but then she kept saying it over and over again. Until finally I realized she wanted a pic without me in it, but was just being passive aggressive about it. So finally I'm like, "Do you want me to move?" And she's like, "Yeah, that would be great. I've been meaning to get some family pics done and this is the perfect location." Continues to get a million pics of her. She's my husband's stepmom, her kids and their families, and my husband and his brothers, while I'm just standing off to the side awkwardly. Then come Christmas, she has the audacity to send my parents a Christmas card using one of the pics of just them from the wedding with a little "from our family to yours" line. This on top of the million other things she's done to be awful. I cannot stand this woman. Maid of honor at my wedding. The ceremony went off without any problems, and she was actually a huge help with setting everything up and organizing most of the day. During the cocktail hour afterwards she gets absolutely smashed and then punches her boyfriend in the face, then somehow convinces him he has been kicked out and has to leave. I spoke to the owner and the bartenders and told them not to serve her any more alcohol at this point, but they didn't think it was an issue yet. As soon as her boyfriend is out of the parking lot, she drags one of my groomsmen to bathroom and gives his skin flute a thorough cleaning. Manages to get more drunk because she was tipping the bartender a lot. She then stumbles onto dance floor during my wife's dance with her father. I managed to stop her before any real interruption happens to the dance, but she then tries to kiss me in front of everyone. I kinda push/drop her and she hits the floor like I've shot out both her kneecaps and starts crying hysterically. My mother-in-law runs over and drags this stupid bitch out of the reception hall, all the while she is shrieking like a banshee because I threw her to the ground. Everything is good for around 2 hours, while the trash bin of honor is nowhere to be seen, until the owner of the golf course taps me on the shoulder and asks to speak to me outside in private. I go outside and see her boyfriend has returned, who I didn't mind seeing there because I actually liked him, but his face is panicked and he just starts apologizing for something. I was pretty drunk, so it took me a few seconds to realize the tar marks all over the 9th green leading up to the golf cart, about 90% submerged in the pond right beside the green. Wasn't too concerned about her dumbass, but unfortunately she was still alive and thrashing around trying to get out of the pond. I just laughed and told the owner I wasn't paying a single cent for any damages. I told them to stop serving her hours previous and to call the police and have her charged for destroying the green and driving the cart into the pond. Surprisingly, he was very understanding of my point of view and we worked together to get everything sorted out. She ended up owing him just over 15 grand, 8 or 9 for the cart and the rest was to fix the green, and lost wages for him not being able to offer people the full 18 holes of golf. Her parents just paid for all of it, and she is currently on a soul-searching adventure in Asia. Despite all this, my wedding was still the most amazing day of my life, and my wife actually thought most of what happened was pretty funny in a Jerry Springer dumpster donkey kind of way. I'm just glad my wife's day wasn't ruined by it, and my best friend, who she blew, has one hell of a story for all of his friends about my wedding. I have a couple, unfortunately. My first marriage didn't go very well. At the wedding, I had a rented tux on, and I asked my new wife not to smear cake on me when we cut the cake because of that. Of course, when the time came, it wasn't just a cute smear of frosting or something like you'd see at most weddings. Oh no, she full on plastered me with cake and a mess of frosting and food coloring. I don't know what was worse, being angry and hurt and embarrassed when the whole room was watching, or when people were pulling me aside later and apologizing for it when her and her parents were still laughing and making jokes about it a couple of hours later. I thankfully remarried a great person years later, and we had a small ceremony that was really very nice. Our photographer was taking pictures afterward, before we were heading to the reception, and I had been talking to my dad when he started, so he just took our picture together first. My mom, being who she is, was incensed by not being first to get our picture taken when she wanted and proceeded to throw a fit and leave. My parents had been divorced for at least a decade or so prior to this. Maybe a couple of minutes later, we were all lining up and getting family together for pictures, and when I couldn't find my mom, I learned that she'd stormed off and left on what would otherwise be one of the best days of my life. There'll always be that storm cloud of pettiness that she left behind because she couldn't handle putting one of her kids ahead of herself for 10 minutes worth of time. My ex-fiancé from many years prior, whom I was still friends with for some reason, texted me multiple times throughout the wedding that I saw afterward about how his wife had sprained her ankle and was in the ER, so they might be late. When I didn't reply because it was my wedding day and I was getting married, he started texting the wedding party to confirm that I had received the message. Shortly before the reception began, he texted the wedding party that he was going to drop his wife off at home and then come to the reception alone. About 20 minutes into dinner, I look up and what do I see but my ex-fiancée walking into the ballroom, looking around, and then coming over and taking a seat at one of the head tables between two members of the wedding party that he knew. He has a history of trying to get attention in weird ways, so my husband and I just decided to ignore it and go on enjoying our day. Later that night, at the little photo booth we had set up, he repeatedly inserted himself into group pictures of my closest friends, some of whom hadn't been in the same room together in over 4 years. It made no sense, he barely knew a lot of them, or had only met them a couple times. Now I have all these pictures of my closest friends all together, and he's in every single one of them. Throughout the night, and especially near the end, he made a point of pulling my husband aside no less than 3 to 4 times, and telling him how happy he was that we were together, and how he had no hard feelings toward him related to us. We broke up almost a decade ago, after he left me for a woman he cheated on me with, so that made absolutely no sense. It just seemed like he couldn't stand not being involved more, or that he wanted our relationship to be something it wasn't. It was so weird, and although my husband and I just joke about it now, it did bother me at moments throughout that day. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.